What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Wrestling Decoded. And today we're doing something a little different. We're not just listing bad finishers, we're actually diagnosing them, like a doctor looking at an x-ray and explaining exactly what went wrong biomechanically and dramatically. Because here's the thing about a finishing move. It has one job and only one job. Convince the audience that what they just watched could genuinely end a fight. And some of the most famous finishers in wrestling history completely failed at that one job in ways that are honestly fascinating to break down once you actually look closely at them instead of just laughing and moving on. Let's get into it. If you enjoy these deep dives into the weirder corners of wrestling history, that's exactly what this channel does. Go ahead and subscribe before we start the examination. First patient, Hulk Hogan's leg drop. This is the most famous finisher on this entire list, closing out arguably more main events than any other move in wrestling history, and it still doesn't hold up under any real scrutiny once you strip away the nostalgia. The actual mechanics are about as simple as a move can possibly get. Hogan drops backward, his leg lands somewhere across an opponent's chest, and that's essentially the entire sequence. There's no aerial component, no real leverage, nothing that visually communicates devastating force the way a genuinely great finisher should. Compare it to what came after in wrestling's evolution: frog splashes, 450 splashes, moves with actual spinning momentum and gravity working in their favor. And the leg drop looks almost quaint by comparison, a relic from a simpler era of storytelling. It survived purely on Hogan's aura and decades of crowd conditioning trained to react to it, not because the move itself ever looked genuinely dangerous on its own merits. Second patient, the Great Khali's brain chop. This one's a case study in mismatched physicality, and honestly, one of the more sympathetic diagnoses on this list. Khali stood over 7 feet tall, genuinely one of the largest performers WWE ever regularly featured, which should theoretically make any strike from him look absolutely terrifying to an opponent. Instead, the brain chop reads as an oddly gentle pat on the head, delivered with almost no visible force behind it, closer to a grandfather greeting a grandchild than a giant ending a wrestling match. The diagnosis here is straightforward. Khali's limited mobility and in-ring experience meant WWE had to build a finisher around what he could safely and consistently execute night after night, rather than what would actually look devastating on television, and the compromise landed somewhere closer to a glorified love tap than a genuine knockout blow. Third patient, Scotty II Hotties the Worm. This one's interesting because the finisher itself was never really the point of the sequence. The entire thing exists as a comedic bit, a full dance routine building up to a single anticlimactic strike right at the very end. Fans genuinely loved it as entertainment in the moment, and it absolutely got over as a signature crowd moment, but as an actual fight-ending maneuver, it's almost designed to undercut itself by its own structure. You spend 20 or 30 seconds building drama and anticipation through choreography and crowd participation, and then deliver a strike with only a fraction of the impact that entire build-up promised the audience. Here's a question worth sitting with. Is a finisher like the Worm actually a failure by wrestling's usual standards, or is it doing a completely different job than the rest of the moves on this list, entertaining an audience rather than genuinely trying to intimidate an opponent? Fourth patient, Mark Henry's finisher, the world's strongest slam. Henry billed himself as the world's strongest man, a genuinely accurate claim, given his real-world competitive strongman background before he ever stepped into a wrestling ring. And yet his signature move consistently looked like he was gently laying an opponent down for a nap rather than slamming them with any real, punishing force. The diagnosis here points to a mismatch between reputation and execution, a wrestler whose entire persona was built around raw, overwhelming power, delivering a finisher that, more often than not, appeared almost completely painless to the person receiving it. Something like a running power slam or a proper powerbomb variation would have far better matched the actual character he was supposedly playing on television, and it's genuinely surprising that particular disconnect never got addressed across his career. Fifth patient, the Ultimate Warrior's running splash. On paper, a big man running at full speed and splashing down onto a downed opponent should look absolutely devastating, a real crushing blow. In practice, especially in Warrior's specific case, it consistently looked more like an enthusiastic pounce than a genuine finishing move. The comparison that really exposes the problem is sitting right there within the same broader style of move, A frog splash gets extra force from height and rotation off the top rope, and a 450 splash adds spinning momentum on top of that same height advantage. A running splash along the flat mat has none of that built-in assistance, which means it needs either genuinely huge size or real conviction and selling behind it to land as a believable finisher, and Warrior's version rarely delivered either one convincingly. Sixth patient, MVP's playmaker, and this is genuinely one of the most physically awkward finishers ever regularly used on national television. The move required MVP to wrap one leg around his opponent's head while balancing entirely on his other leg, holding that precarious, wobbly position long enough for the whole thing to register as an intentional wrestling maneuver rather than an accident happening in real time. It's not a quick, decisive strike. It's a slow, technically demanding balancing act that looks more like an improvised piece of physical comedy than an actual knockout move designed to end a match convincingly. Seventh patient, closely related to the last one, the overdrive, used at various points by MVP, Carlito, and Randy Orton across their careers. This is a complicated-looking maneuver where the wrestler delivering the move actually slams his own knee into the mat with the opponent's head cushioned in between as the actual point of impact. If anyone's genuinely at risk of injury in that exchange, it's arguably the person performing the move, not the person supposedly being finished off by it. It looks elaborate and dramatic in the setup, but the actual physics of the thing suggests the giver is absorbing more punishment than the receiver. Quick pause here. Drop a comment on which of these finishers surprised you the most, because I have a feeling most fans genuinely forgot the overdrive even existed until just now. Eighth patient, and this one's a genuine relic straight from wrestling's golden era, George the Animal Steele's flying hammerlock. In an era when finishers were often held for extended periods to sell real, believable pain and exhaustion on the mat, Steele's version never stuck around long enough to actually accomplish that basic storytelling goal. The move itself, an armlock applied with genuine potential to hurt an opponent if held properly and sold correctly, gets undercut entirely by how briefly it's actually applied before the match abruptly ends. It's a finisher that looks like it's setting up a longer story beat, building towards something, and then just cuts off before that story ever really gets to develop naturally. And the final patient on today's chart, Santino Marella's Cobra. This one's an interesting outlier because, unlike most of the finishers on this list, it was never actually trying to look devastating in the first place, which arguably makes it a different case entirely. Marella pulled a sock puppet shaped like a snake over his hand, pumped it up theatrically in full view of the crowd, and pretended it was a real cobra striking his opponent, complete with his own exaggerated fear of the puppet to help sell the entire bit as genuinely dangerous within the fiction of the match. It's silly by design, built entirely around comedy rather than intimidation, and other wrestlers genuinely committed to bumping hard for it as though it carried real weight, which is honestly part of what made it work as well as it did. So here's the actual diagnosis running through every single one of these cases. A finisher fails for one of two consistent, recurring reasons. Either the physical mechanics simply don't generate believable force, like Hogan's leg drop or Callie's brain chop, or the presentation itself undercuts the eventual payoff, like the Worm's long comedic build-up ending in a genuinely minor strike. The moves that survive as truly legendary finishers, the RKOs and stone-cold stunners of the wrestling world, tend to solve both of those problems at once. Real, visible visual impact delivered without unnecessary complication or awkward mechanics getting in the way of the moment. Everything on today's list got at least one of those two elements wrong somewhere along the way, and in a few cases, spectacularly wrong. Which of these finishers do you think deserves the most sympathy once you actually understand the reasoning behind it? And which one do you think genuinely earned its bad reputation fair and square? Let me know down in the comments. And if you want more of these breakdowns of wrestling's strangest, silliest, and most fascinating in-ring moments, make sure you're subscribed to Wrestling Decoded. There's plenty more of this still to dig through together.